Look at this photograph. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a formal portrait from the 1860s. Three young women, in elegant silk dresses, their posture flawless, their expressions composed the kind of image you might pass in a museum without a second thought. But in 2019, something about this photograph drew a historian's attention. Something hidden in the way the sisters held their hands. Something that had gone unnoticed for more than 150 years. What she uncovered would change everything we believed about resistance, survival, and the silent war fought in plain sight. These three women were not simply posing for a portrait. They were sending a message their captors never understood. The autumn rain pounded against the windows of Harrison's auction house in Richmond, Virginia, as Dr. Amelia Grant studied a collection of Civil War era photographs set to be sold. At 43, she had spent 2 decades teaching American history at Howard University, yet nothing had prepared her for what she was about to find. The collection came from the estate of a recently deceased antiques dealer who had spent 50 years gathering photographs from the antebellum South. Most were unremarkable ridged portraits of affluent families, plantation homes, formal gatherings preserved in silver and glass. Then, Amelia paused at one particular photograph. 3 young black women sat in an ornate parlor, dressed in silk gowns that would have been costly even for wealthy white families. Their hair was styled elegantly, their posture impeccable, but it was their hands that caught Amelia's breath. Each sister held her hands in a distinct position on her lap. The eldest placed her right hand over her left, fingers slightly spread. The middle sister's hands were clasped, her thumbs crossed in an unusual way. The youngest rested one hand flat, while the other formed a subtle shape against the dark fabric of her skirt. Amelia had seen hand placements in Victorian photographs before. They were common, often directed by photographers seeking visual balance. But these positions felt deliberate, coded, and intentional. She turned the photograph over. On the back, faded handwriting read, "The Kingsley Sisters, Charleston, 1863. Find something interesting?" asked Marcus Webb, the auction house director, stepping beside her. "These women," Amelia replied without looking up. "Do you know anything about them?" Marcus shrugged. The previous owner left no documentation. "We assumed they were free women of color, possibly from a wealthy family. The dresses suggest considerable means." Amelia examined the image again. Something felt wrong. In 1863, Charleston was deep in Confederate territory. The idea of 3 black women sitting for such an elaborate portrait in such finery at the height of the Civil War seemed nearly impossible. "I'd like to purchase this photograph," she said quietly. "The entire collection is being sold as one lot." Amelia looked at him. "Then I'll take the entire collection." Back in her office at Howard University, Amelia pinned the photograph to her research board and began investigating. The first question was simple. Who were the Kingsley sisters? She started with Charleston's census records from the 1860s. Free black families were rare in South Carolina, and those with substantial wealth even rarer. After 3 days of searching, she found nothing. No Kingsley family appeared in any record she could locate. She expanded her search to church records, property deeds, and tax documents. Still, nothing. "It's like they never existed," she murmured to her graduate assistant, David, who had grown equally absorbed in the mystery. "Maybe Kingsley wasn't their real name," David suggested. "If they were hiding something, they might have used an alias." Amelia considered it. It made sense. But why would 3 black women need to conceal their identity in a photograph? And who had taken the picture? She examined the photograph under magnification, searching for identifying marks. Victorian photographers often stamped their work, leaving signatures or studio names embossed on the cardstock. Then she found it. In the lower right corner, nearly invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny embossed seal. J.R. Whitmore, Charleston. A quick search revealed that Jonathan Whitmore had operated a photography studio in Charleston from 1858 to 1867. He was white, from a prominent family, and had documented much of Charleston's elite during the war years. But why would a white photographer from a Confederate family create such an elaborate portrait of 3 black women? Amelia dug deeper into Whitmore's history and uncovered something unexpected. After the war, Whitmore had moved north to Boston, where he became involved in abolitionist causes and donated significant sums to freedmen's schools. "He changed sides," Amelia said, staring at the screen. "Or maybe he was never on the side we assumed." The next morning, she booked a flight to Charleston. The answers she needed weren't in databases or digital archives. They were in the city where the photograph had been taken, buried in the history Charleston preferred to forget. In October, Charleston still carried the weight of summer, the air heavy with humidity and magnolia scent. Amelia checked into a small hotel near the historic district and headed to the Charleston County Public Library's South Carolina room. The archivist, an elderly woman named Dorothy, listened carefully as Amelia explained her research. "Jonathan Whitmore," Dorothy repeated, narrowing her eyes. "That's a name I haven't heard in years. My grandmother used to speak of him." Amelia leaned forward. "Your grandmother knew him?" "Knew of him?" She had been a child during Reconstruction, but she remembered the stories. Whitmore wasn't only a photographer. According to family legend, he was something far more dangerous to the Confederacy. Dorothy guided Amelia to a restricted area of the archive where delicate documents were stored in climate-controlled cases. She brought out a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This was donated anonymously in 1952, Dorothy explained. We didn't know who it belonged to until a researcher in the 1980s identified the handwriting as Amelia carefully opened the journal. The entries were cryptic, filled with references to packages delivered and routes confirmed. Then she found an entry dated March 1863. The three sisters sat for their portrait today. The message is embedded. If our friends in the North understand the code, the next passage will proceed as planned. God protect them all. Amelia's hands trembled. He had been using photographs to send coded messages. Dorothy nodded slowly. The Underground Railroad didn't end when the war began. It changed, and Whitmore was part of it. Amelia photographed the journal entry and kept reading. The sisters, Whitmore wrote, were not named Kingsley. Their real names were Clara, Ruth, and Viola. They had escaped from a plantation in Georgia 3 years earlier and had been living under assumed names in Charleston, working as seamstresses for a sympathetic white family. But they were more than survivors, they were conductors. Amelia spent the next week tracing every reference to Clara, Ruth, and Viola in Whitmore's journal. The photographer had been meticulous, recording not only his subjects but the system they had created together. The hand positions in the photographs were not random. They were a language. According to Whitmore's notes, the sisters had designed a visual code based on hand placements, finger positions, and the arrangement of objects within the frame. Each combination conveyed specific information: safe houses, dangerous routes, times of passage, names of allies, and enemies. The photographs were distributed through a network of abolitionists posing as art collectors, traveling merchants, and even Confederate sympathizers who had secretly changed allegiances. The images passed through checkpoints and inspections without suspicion because they appeared to be ordinary portraits. It was hiding in plain sight, Amelia explained to David during a video call. The Confederates saw what they expected: black women in elegant clothing, likely servants dressed up by their owners for a vanity portrait. They never imagined these women were sending military intelligence right under their noses. David was quiet for a moment. How many photographs are we talking about? Amelia checked her notes. Whitmore's journal mentions at least 40 portraits taken between 1862 and 1865. Most featured the sisters, but some included other members of the network. Each photograph carried different information, and the one you found at the auction. Amelia looked at the photograph pinned to her board. According to the journal entry from March 1863, this image confirmed that the Combahee River route was safe for passage. 3 months later, Harriet Tubman led the Combahee River raid, freeing more than 750 enslaved people. The implication struck David immediately. Are you saying the sisters helped plan the raid? I'm saying their photograph may have been part of the intelligence that made it possible. Amelia's research led her to the descendants of the white family who had sheltered the sisters in Charleston. The family's records had been preserved by a great-great-great-granddaughter named Helen, who lived in a restored antebellum home on the outskirts of the city. Helen was in her 70s, sharp-eyed and cautious. She had spent years guarding her family's complicated history and was hesitant to share it with strangers. My ancestors were Confederate, she said, pouring tea in her formal parlor. At least, that's what their neighbors believed. The truth was more complicated. She explained that her great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth, had operated a seamstress business that employed free black women. On the surface, it appeared respectable. In reality, it was a cover for one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations of the Civil War. Elizabeth's husband was a Confederate officer, Helen continued. He had access to troop movements, supply routes, military plans. He passed that information to Elizabeth, who encoded it in dress patterns and fabric designs. The seamstresses then incorporated those patterns into the clothing they made. And the photographs? Amelia asked. Helen nodded. The dresses in Whitmore's portraits weren't just beautiful. They were messages. The pattern of lace on a collar, the number of buttons on a sleeve, the arrangement of ribbons, everything had meaning. Amelia's mind raced. The sisters were not only posing with coded hand positions, their entire outfits were part of the message. How was the information decoded? Helen stood and walked to an old secretary desk. She retrieved a small, worn booklet and handed it to Amelia. This was my great-great-grandmother's cipher guide. It explains how to read the patterns. Amelia opened the booklet with trembling hands. Inside were detailed drawings of dress elements paired with their meanings. A rose pattern signified safe passage. Vertical stripes indicated danger. A specific arrangement of lace communicated the number of people waiting for transport. The sisters had not merely been sending messages. They had been transmitting entire escape plans. Amelia returned to the photograph of the three sisters and began decoding every detail. The process took days of careful study, cross-referencing Whitmore's journal with Elizabeth's cipher guide and historical records. The message hidden in the March 1863 photograph was more detailed than she had imagined. Clara's hand position signaled a date range the first week of June. Ruth's clasped hands with crossed thumbs identified a location: the Combahee River ferry crossing. Viola's flat palm and curved fingers conveyed a number approximately 700. The dress patterns added further layers. The lace on Clara's collar indicated that Union gunboats would provide cover. The buttons on Ruth's sleeves confirmed that local guides had been secured. The ribbon arrangement on Viola's bodice named the operations leader a woman known by the codename Moses, Harriet Tubman. Amelia leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. The Combahee River raid had been one of the most successful military operations, led by a woman in American history. Tubman had guided Union forces up the river, liberating more than 750 enslaved people in a single night. Historians had long questioned how she had obtained such precise intelligence about Confederate positions. Now Amelia had an answer. The intelligence had been gathered by a network of black women working in plain sight, encoded in photographs and dress patterns, and transmitted through a system so refined that the Confederacy never suspected it. They were spies, Amelia whispered, the most effective spies of the Civil War. And history forgot them entirely. She thought of the monuments to Confederate generals, the textbooks celebrating military strategists, the museums preserving weapons and uniforms. Yet these three women, whose courage and intelligence had helped free hundreds, had disappeared from memory until now. The question that haunted her was what had happened to Clara, Ruth, and Viola after the war. Whitmore's journal ended in 1865, and Elizabeth's records made no mention of the sisters after Richmond fell. Amelia began searching Freedmen's Bureau records documenting the lives of formerly enslaved people during Reconstruction. The files were incomplete, often damaged, and scattered across archives. After weeks of research, she found a reference that made her heart stop: a registration document from Savannah, Georgia, dated November 1865, listing three sisters applying for marriage licenses on the same day: Clara, Ruth, and Viola. The record noted that all three were formerly of Charleston and worked as teachers. Amelia traced them to a freedmen's school established by Northern missionaries in Savannah. The school's records, preserved in a university archive in Atlanta, included staff lists, student rosters, and annual reports. Clara had taught reading and writing to adults who had been forbidden to learn during slavery. Ruth specialized in mathematics and accounting, preparing students for economic independence. Viola taught music and, according to one report, possessed an extraordinary talent for codes and ciphers, which she used to teach children to read. The sisters had continued their work, transforming from spies into educators, using the same skills that had freed hundreds to lift thousands out of illiteracy. Amelia also discovered a letter Clara had written to a Northern benefactor in 1867. "We were never named in the histories of the war. We were not generals or politicians. We were seamstresses and subjects of photographs. But we understood that freedom required more than battles. It required intelligence, patience, and the courage to hide in plain sight. We do not seek recognition. We seek only to ensure that those who come after us will never be invisible again." Amelia read the letter repeatedly, uncovering new meaning each time. The sisters had known they would be forgotten. Her research eventually led her to living descendants of the three sisters. Through genealogical records, DNA databases, and countless phone calls, she traced family lines that had spread from Savannah to Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. The first descendant she contacted was Michael, a retired postal worker in Chicago whose great-great-grandmother was Ruth. "My family always said our ancestors were teachers," he told Amelia over the phone. "We knew they had lived through slavery, but the details were lost. People didn't talk about those times." In Detroit, Amelia met Patricia, a school principal descended from Clara. Patricia wept when she saw the photograph. "She looks like my daughter," Patricia whispered, "the same eyes, the same way of holding her head. I never knew what she looked like before." The most emotional meeting was with James, a musician in Atlanta, descended from Viola. He had inherited his great-great-great-great-mother's single quotes as love of music without knowing its source. "She taught music," he asked, staring at the photograph taken at the Freedmen's School. "She taught codes through music." Amelia explained that the songs carried hidden messages, their rhythms encoding information. She had transformed resistance into art. James remained quiet for a long time. Then he lifted his guitar and began playing a melody his grandmother had taught him as a child. A tune passed down through generations without explanation. "I always wondered where this song came from," he said softly. "Now I know." At Amelia's invitation, the descendants gathered for the first time in Charleston, near the spot where Whitmore's studio had once stood. They formed a circle, holding copies of the photograph, bound together by a history that had nearly been erased. Amelia published her findings in a historical journal, including higher-resolution images of the photograph, excerpts from Whitmore's journal, and Elizabeth's cipher guide. The academic response was swift and enthusiastic. Historians describe the discovery as one of the most significant revelations about Civil War-era resistance in decades. But Amelia wanted more than scholarly recognition. She approached the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture with a proposal: acquire the photograph and create an exhibit dedicated to the hidden intelligence networks of the Civil War. The museum agreed. 18 months later, the exhibit Hidden in Plain Sight, The Secret War of the Seamstress Spies opened to the public. It featured the original photograph of Clara, Ruth, and Viola, alongside Whitmore's journal, Elizabeth's cipher guide, and dozens of related artifacts. At the center stood an interactive display where visitors could decode photographs using the Sisters system, experiencing firsthand the ingenuity required to resist oppression. On opening night, the descendants stood together before the exhibit. Michael, Patricia, James, and 17 other family members from across the country had gathered. Patricia spoke for them. For over 150 years, our grandmothers were invisible. History recorded the generals and politicians, the battles and treaties, but it forgot the women who sewed messages into dresses, who posed for photographs that carried secrets, who risked everything to help others find freedom. Tonight, they are invisible no more. The photograph of Clara, Ruth, and Viola hung in a place of honor, illuminated by soft light that revealed every detail. Their elegant dresses, composed expressions, and carefully positioned hands. Hands that had spoken a language of defiance. Hands that had helped shape history. 1 year after the exhibit opened, Amelia returned to Charleston. She walked through the historic district, past elegant homes and tourist carriages, past monuments and markers telling one version of the city's past. She stopped at the corner where Whitmore's studio had once stood. The building was gone, replaced by a boutique hotel, but a small plaque had been installed at her request. On this site stood the photography studio of Jonathan Whitmore, where images of resistance were created during the Civil War. The subjects of his most important work, Clara, Ruth, and Viola, used coded hand positions and dress patterns to transmit intelligence that helped free hundreds of enslaved people. Their courage remained hidden for over 150 years. Amelia touched the plaque gently, then walked to the waterfront where the Combahee River flowed toward the sea. She thought about the countless photographs from that era stored in archives and attics, dismissed as ordinary portraits. How many contained messages still undecoded? How many stories were waiting to be uncovered? She thought of the sisters who had known they would be forgotten and had resisted anyway, who understood that some acts of courage are performed not for recognition, but for the unwavering belief that freedom matters, even when no one is watching. And she thought of the photograph itself, that small rectangle of silver and glass that had survived war, neglect, and the deliberate erasure of Black history. It had waited patiently for someone to look closely enough to see what it truly was. Not just a portrait, but a declaration. A testament to the power of ordinary people who refused to remain silent, who found ways to speak when speech was forbidden, who hid their resistance in plain sight until the world was ready to see it. Amelia took out her phone and photographed the plaque, the river, the sky. Then she sent the image to the descendants with a simple message: they are remembered. They will not be forgotten.